Hello, everyone, and welcome back to State of the Navy, the latest and last installment of Defense One's State of Defense events. We're delighted to have you here. I hope everybody caught the CNO's interview. We will shortly be kicking off our discussion panel with a couple of Navy experts, but first, a few reminders. So, at the right of your screen, or wherever you put it on your personal Zoom incarnation, you will find the chat box, and there you can ask our panelists questions, you can chat with our attendees, ask for technical assistance. We will be fielding those questions, and we'll discuss at least a few of them at the end of our program. But I encourage you to submit them along the way, and we'll take a look at them. So this event is being recorded and will be available on demand shortly for you to share with your colleagues and anybody else you think might be interested. So without further ado, let me welcome our two panelists. We have Sam Tangredi. He is the Leidos Chair of Future Warfare Studies and Professor of National Naval and Maritime Strategy at the U.S. Naval War College. He is a Naval Academy graduate who later earned a PhD in international relations. He served a 30-year naval career as a surface warfare officer, including command at sea, and he has served as a strategic planner and a leader of strategic planning. He is the author of, among other books, Anti-Access Warfare, Countering A280 Strategies. We also are pleased to have Jill Ruff. She is currently a distinguished visiting fellow at George Mason's Center for Security Policy Studies. She is also a Naval Academy graduate who later earned a PhD in public policy. She has more than 25 years in military and government and national security service. She served as an active duty surface warfare officer and later as an intelligence officer in the Naval Reserve. She is, in fact, a Navy Reserve captain, but she is speaking today as a civilian. Among her many roles and command tours at DIA with the Joint Staff, with STRATCOM, and more, she led 57 analysts in the Combined Joint Intelligence Operations Center in Kabul, Afghanistan in 2012 and 2013. So Sam and Jill, thank you again so much for joining us. Let's jump right in. The CNO was talking an awful lot about Battle Force 2045. Indeed, that's the biggest news of the naval world of the past few weeks. What do you think about what he had to say?
Well, I think it was a good rundown of what Secretary Esper had released last week. I also think that what we didn't get into in our conversation, and I think what is on many people's minds, is how we're going to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So the big looming question, regardless of whether you're going to move around funds within the Department of Defense or within the Department of the Navy, is really you're looking at an expansive growth. It's the plan accounts for more of everything for all intents and purposes. And that's not a bad thing. It could be very well warranted, but how we're going to actually fund it is the big, very large open question right now.
Mm-hmm, sure thing. And it's been pointed out to me that the more things you have of discrete and various types, the harder it gets. And I was interested, and then the question becomes, okay, so if you can't take care of the ships you have now, how are you going to why are you asking for more? And I thought the CNO came back and said, well, yeah, obviously maintenance has got to get better. And it seemed like he had, it seemed like, by the metrics of decreased delays and on-time releases, it's coming up from a kind of abysmal 30% to somewhere at least a little bit better than that. So I think that was important, but I think that still just the notion of banking on a top line increase in the current COVID racked high deficit budgetary environment, is that strategic planning or is that wishful thinking? No. So
am I back online?
Yeah. Hi, Sam. How are you?
Okay. Wishful thinking.
Hmm.
And if you go through SecDef's remarks, he specifically said in one of the articles that I've encountered is that he hopes to gain some of that from greater efficiencies in the Department of Defense. Now, as soon as you say that, that makes me think, where are those efficiencies? CNO said in his talk today that he was hoping for 2%, 2.1% to balance inflation, and then a 2% real increase. Where's that going to come from? SecDef does not indicate that he's going to cut that out of other services. And I think perhaps SecDef thinks that if he reduces the number of carrier battle groups, he will free up money for that. I think that's very unrealistic. And the whole numbers that he's tossing about, 500 ship Navy, whatever, is completely unrealistic. The only way we could get to that is if we start calling things autonomous systems ships. For example, Knifefish, the system that we have for mine countermeasures. I mean, you call it a ship, and then you got that number of ships. It is unrealistic. And one more comment I'll make on that is the studies that have just been released really reproduce to some extent the studies that the Navy did in 2017. I was very surprised when the SecDef took away the 30-year shipbuilding plan and says this isn't sufficient in that, because basically, first thing I thought is, well, he's looking for a study that has the answers he's already thought of. And I think the answers is that carriers are unaffordable. Large deck carriers are unaffordable. We need to cut that. We need to build no more. And that's one of the things behind this plan. Okay, that's debatable. You can argue that that is good or bad. My concern is that, you can't just present something as a meaningful study when you already have the answers. And to me, a lot of it is unrealistic. And I'll stop right there.
Okay. All right.
This is, like, if I could just add one more thing, and I do completely agree, the funding here is really just a very, very open question. And we need companion plans to go along with how you're going to maintain, how you're going to do training and readiness issues, what the personnel aspect's going to look like. All of that is going to come with a price tag. That is, again, details that are yet to be provided. But lest we be too negative about the plan, I do think it's important to highlight a couple of good things, right? So for one, this reconceived notion of what a big deck amphib could be, and they specifically called out the USS America, but whatever it could be moving forward, as a former amphib sailor, it sort of breaks my heart a little bit. It's such a capable platform on many fronts to be able to just zoom in on the flight deck and say it's going to be the the aviation platform of the future, undercuts its ability in other avenues, and the well deck is certainly very capable. On the flip side, one could think that this is a way to raise the strategic value of that platform, and possibly it could be useful as a deterrent, right? So if you're talking about a certain number of super carriers plus light carriers, then the overall numbers of the class of carriers that you're discussing is higher than we would currently have right now. And so when the CNO talked about the number of carriers, really that swing factor there is how you conceive of the big deck amphib. And I think that's very interesting proposal moving forward. I also loved that they have the combat logistics ships in there. I mean, oftentimes they just get left on the bottom and not thought about. Logistics are so critical. At least shows that they have a comprehensive approach to what the fleet would look like. You cannot do this in the Indo-Pacific region without logistics. And 500 is a round number. It's nice and catchy. And so as far as the 355 versus 500, certainly it's there for strategic communication purposes, but there's some value in that.
Right.
Can I follow up on
Please.
what Jill just said? Yeah, no, I agree with her. There's no reason we can't integrate the large deck amphibious ships into a battle group. In fact, I wrote an article, I think in 2018, exactly about that. Navy's been thinking about that since at least 2017. Simply a question of how you configure the air wing. F-35 B, the Marines VSTOL, or the version of F-35, be pretty effective in a combined role with a big deck carrier. These things we've already thought about. The logistics problem is a problem. The issue is that a lot of the things in this plan are based on an increase in the budget. And if there's no indication that you have an increase in the budget, you don't have an effective plan. And I think that's Jill's concern, my concern, other people's concern.
All right. So leaving aside the question of whether they have the money to do all of this, we can still talk about the interesting things that they might do if they got it, or at least things that they might do in slightly smaller scale. One thing that I didn't get to ask CNO about, but which Secretary Esper brought up in his rollout of the plan, was the notion that we're going to have unmanned ship-based aircraft of all types. And you mentioned fighters, refuelers, early warning, electronic attack aircraft. Presumably these things without cockpits can be smaller, and maybe you get a small deck carrier, an amphib, that can do more because it's got these smaller things on it. I mean, obviously you need to maintain them and you need to have the specialized operators and you need to have people on it, but is there a possibility, Sam, you wrote about this, and Jill, you're, personnel very, very well as well. Could we make a smaller amphib or a smaller carrier that could do a good amount of what a large deck carrier does today?
Sure, I think we can. It is not out of the question to be able to do that. The problem is, of course, is the upfront cost of developing these systems. That before we build a carrier capable of doing that, we need to build the unmanned aircraft and figure out how to control them over long distance under battle conditions. That's one of the things that we haven't perfected yet with, say, Predator or Reaper. We've used them against opponents that basically could not fight back. Going into a situation like this plan calls against great power competition or great power conflict, that's a whole different question. That's a whole different question of how these systems operate. And I think we're nowhere near being able to operate unmanned systems in a high-tech battle condition. And so that's what we should be working on. I agree with SecDef that we should be moving in that direction, but we haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I don't think that the unmanned aircraft itself is the limiting factor. I think that the data networks, the ability to have proper command and control, if it's armed to be able to do proper targeting, that's your limiting factor, not the actual unmanned aircraft itself. We've made leaps and bounds and the technology is quite mature. We're still working on making sure that we have secure comms and ability to control those vessels and aircraft as they go forward.
And the CNO did seem to make a point of saying we definitely need more robust capabilities in that area, and the Navy's working on it. It's not just refreshing NMCI to the tune of 7.7 billion. It's it's something new, and he's got people working on it. So so great. I was interested to hear that he's working very closely, or the Navy is working very closely with the Air Force on the 6th gen aircraft. I guess we don't know anything more about that. I had thought that the Navy had sworn off another joint aircraft like JSF, but I guess there's no harm in talking with the other folks who are working on this.
I think the Navy is absolutely, right to be talking to the Air Force about it, but so much of this still remains in the dark. It's classified right now. We're not going to be able to have access to that for quite some time to be able to assess what the capabilities might be. CNO mentioned that it was less about the actual capabilities than it was about the process, and I don't do acquisitions quite as well, but if you talk to those folks, I think there's value in testing out new mechanisms moving forward. But it suffices just look at what we can see. Again, Congress's level of commitment to this and whether they're standing behind, next gen air dominance as it moves forward. And that's still questionable as well. Again, comes back to the money issue. They have decreased funding for it. And that means we're still either working out the requirements, it's not compelling or not fully justified, or the technology is not mature or maturing fast enough. But we'll have to wait and see.
Yep, right. Let's take it back to a big picture thing. The Navy is being designed to fight China, or to deter China, and hopefully to be effective in the latter, even as it works to be effective in the former. Do we think that it is doing an adequate job? I mean, this whole budget question notwithstanding, the idea that maybe they're not quite planning for budget reality, do we think the Navy is on the right track here?
My view is that the Navy, optimizing the Navy to fight China is a mistake, because the Navy's role is much broader than that. It is a geoeconomic role. You have navies, and when I say navies, small n, and that includes maritime, space, and cyber. These are fluid mediums that we need for our prosperity. We need to have access to them. And in each case, that requires a certain degree of what we would call forward presence. And you design a Navy to control a fluid medium, that is the maritime world. And you also design it to be able to fight in the situation. But navies don't win wars. You win wars by taking territory and controlling population. And so when they say design the Navy to fight China, I don't think we really fathom what that is, because in a lot of cases, what we're doing is we're assuming that we can conduct, say, hypersonic missile strikes or something against mainland targets on the mainland of the PRC, such as command and control nodes and stuff, and not realize that in their eyes, there's no reason that they shouldn't strike Hawaii or San Diego. I mean, the Navy would be better designed if we can interdict them rather than optimize to fight a war in China, against China, because a war against China will include, they don't even have to sortie the PLAN. You're talking about a war versus the land. And I'm not so sure we should optimize the Navy for that role.
Well, there's certainly a lot to unpack there. I think my view on this would be that we are shifting gears, obviously looking at great power competition. Let's not assume great power conflict quite yet, as you had mentioned, Brad. I think that's an important distinction that it's incumbent, particularly on the Navy, to keep in mind, because we do have a presence mission. We have a very strong historical tie to maintaining freedom of the seas, and that is very important. We can't neglect that crucial role, as well as deterring aggression. So as we get ready for what could be a high-end fight, we also need to make sure that we're able to do what we have always done historically, which is protect the global commons. And again, space and cyber are in there as well. As far as China specifically, they are a strategic power. CNOs aren't wrong in that front, and nor is the rest of the national security institutions that are looking at this. But I think we forget that we can get trapped in the regional conflicts. You want to focus on the strategic power. You want to make sure that your eye is on the end game. However, you can get tripped up along the way with, the presence mission degrading our platforms so much as we continue to go forward, and regional conflicts, and North Korea, rattling their saber, and then we have to deal with them, right? Those things come up along the way. Between here and 2045 is going to be a lot of activity. We don't have a vote in all of that activity. The enemy always gets a vote. So we need to make sure we're ready for that too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, let's switch gears real briefly. I asked the CNO about how he thought his efforts to lead the Navy towards a better appreciation of diversity and conversations about race and racial issues were going. He, just to refresh everybody's memory, and he stood up a Navy task force on diversity over the summer. That task force released an interim report a few weeks ago with 6 areas of focus: recruiting and promotion and the like. He also asked in a video, he asked the fleet's leaders to please hold discussions. Please, make sure that your command is talking about these issues. And I asked him how that was going. He said, it started, but more needs to happen. How do you think the Navy is doing on this?
I'll start, and I would just offer, I think, a strong congratulations to both the CNO and to McPon Smith, actually. I think they're both leading the way in this area and putting out a strong and united approach to tackling racism, sexism, homophobia, and other issues that are systemic within the force. And they're also focused on excellence, not just avoiding bad behavior. And that's a really important distinction as you're trying to make systemic change in an institution. If you're just looking to weed out a racist, that's one level of achieving greatness. But if you're looking to have the entire force really embrace diversity as a goal and leverage the talents of all of our sailors, that's a higher level mission. And that's what we're aimed at. The leadership is strong here. I think they're doing a great job, matched with leadership of the Air Force, General Brown, who's been speaking about this quite a bit. But the institution is a large one. And so in order to make sure that that change trickles all the way through down to the lowest level commanders, they really have to continue to keep the push on. Recently, one of a senior Navy officer was doing a webinar talking about diversity, and one of the examples they used was that there was an officer from the Naval Academy and an officer from ROTC, and so therefore we had some different perspectives. And as a grad, I appreciate the notion that the college experiences were different, but if you consider diversity to be everything, you will talk about nothing and you will solve nothing. So I think their leadership is strong. He needs to continue to press forward to make change. And part of that is convincing people that there is a problem. We are still at step one for many people, understanding that there are systemic issues in the force. And if we can't get through past step one, we're never going to get to step 10.
My perspective is a little bit different, only in the fact that from my point of view, having the discussion about diversity and that is a no-brainer because it's called good leadership. You want to be able to integrate everyone in the force. You want to have an environment that brings out everyone's talent and everyone's capability. You want an environment in which everyone feels like they are contributing their abilities, that their abilities are being accepted, that their relationships with their peers and with their superiors and with their subordinates are good. And that, to me, that's good leadership. That's what you want to be constantly doing. As far as systemic changes, it is tough to do that. For us, the Navy, we can, as Jill pointed out, we can weed out the racists because we can hammer them. I mean, we have something that the civilian society doesn't have. We can use the UCMJ, and all our administrative procedures so that if we identify someone with that attitude, we could eventually eliminate that person. Obviously, civilian society can't do that. But as far as systemic change, the systemic change that needs is not organizational, it's within the heart of every individual and is a societal change. And the Navy could try its best, and I want it to do that. But to get a systemic change, you need to be changing in society overall. And that's bigger than the Navy and tougher to do. If you really wanted a diverse Navy, you'd bring back the draft. But of course, we're not going to do that.
Gotcha. One concrete thing that I think it seems to me like a positive development is the idea that you're not going to have photographs in the jackets that get forward to officer promotion boards. Is that a good thing? Are there more things like that have been done that are concrete things that can be immediately be done to kind of reduce the ways that people act with without the they can unduly influence people because people like to promote people who look like themselves and that sort of thing. Is that a good thing? Should there be more of that? Are there more easy things like that to do?
Well, I think that's an interesting example because we say it's easy, but it's actually over the years it's been a cyclic. Put the photos back in, take the photos out. Put the photos back in, take the photos out. I think this is about the fourth iteration of whether photos will be included in promotion boards or not. So we'll see if this one sticks. I think this again represents that tension within the military in particular for trying to stop against unconscious bias, which is what you're referring to, trying to promote people that look like you. But also we want folks who represent well, who have a military look, who are taking care of themselves, who are physically fit. Those are important things for the military. And there's a tension there between the use of a photograph. And culturally, over time, it has shifted back and forth. Again, in and out, in and out. Currently, they're out. We'll see if this one lasts. But we have to solve that tension, and we have to tackle it head on. If you don't get the bulk of the force, understanding that this could be related to the unconscious bias problem, that policy won't stay. And give me another 5 years and it'll go back, and that photographs will be part of promotion boards. And I don't want to be pessimistic for the future, but we really need to have everyone on the same page for what the end goal here, which is why I think the leadership is so very, very important. You can make systemic change. And the military, if you look at this, is often the institution that does so. We integrated African Americans into the military before societal change occurred in America. This is the place where we could see results moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to just add to Jill that we should actually compliment ourselves a lot, because I think that the military is actually the most integrated aspect in American society. I'm sorry, recently there were a lot of articles, the departing education officer, chief education officer, complained about Navy's not diverse enough. When you take a look at the Silicon Valley high-tech companies, it is hard to find a CEO who is not it's hard to find an African-American CEO, for example. I think the military has gone great strides, and we've set a great example. Now, should we be sanguine? Should we sit on our laurels? No. But I think that a lot of the principles that we have are very laudable. And I think that we sometimes we're searching for perfection. I don't know if we can. And my cynical view is that those people on selection boards will somehow choose the people that are more like them because that validates them. And there's a psychological factor that is very hard to overcome. And we have to think about that, those terms too.
Yeah, it's hard to find an African-American CNO or four-star admiral for that matter. And it takes a long time to grow one. So I guess start now and get the pipeline moving. Speaking of the pipeline, Jill, you have broad experience in intelligence and Navy intelligence and the cyber world, and there's been a lot of discussion, particularly in the last administration, but even in this one, about increasing what's called permeability. The idea that in order to get the tech-oriented, the cyber experts, the folks with the brains and experience that we need to tackle these requirements of 21st century warfare, we need to find a better way to help civilians with this expertise come into the Navy. And probably that means leave the Navy, back and forth, bring them in, have them serve, have them lead, have them distribute their knowledge, and then get out again. Where are we on that?
I think the ball's in the Navy's court, and actually it's in DoD's court writ large. In the fiscal year 19 National Defense Authorization Act, Congress gave the department quite a few very generous authorities that they could use to pilot certain programs within the field of personnel with critical skills, cyber being one of them. I think that the department is now trying to figure out what to do with those authorities. They haven't leveraged them altogether too much, and we're looking to see what you could come up with. Permeability being one of the key aspects. So a notion that they allow the department to give constructive service credit for people coming in with a great deal of tech experience. However, you're coming into a military force that would shape strongly against a 29-year-old 05, right? And so what you're trying to solve is a cultural problem, I think, less so than an authorities issue. If the department or if the Navy wanted to bring a group in and could test it out and they asked for that authority, I think Congress would give it to them. They're pushing hard on critical skills, but we haven't quite figured out how to culturally adapt to the kind of talent that we're looking for in the cyber realm. And I think that's going to be a continual problem. In addition to how do you compensate them at a level that they are accustomed to and get them in and adjusted to military lifestyle.
Right, the compensation. One more thing that we need to find more money for somehow.
Yeah, I would like to pile on to that. It's a tough situation because we just don't pay people enough to draw them out of a high-paying industry into the military. Now, you will get individuals who will do that. I have worked with individuals who have come out of industry, said, I want to serve my country. I want to serve my country specifically in the Navy. And there are individuals, but that's a small group. Myself, if I were running things, then I would, again, institute a draft of high-tech people. That's how you're going to get them, because we don't pay them enough. Now, maybe you can do a high-tech corps like the medical corps, and we could say we can bring in, just like you could bring in a surgeon as an 06 because they are a notable top surgeon. Perhaps that's what we need to do. Perhaps we need a cyber corps in which we can draw people in at ranks comparable to their position on the outside and pay them something to some extent towards what they would other earn. Maybe that is the solution. I would play around with that one.
And we actually did play around with that one. The National Commission on Military National Public Service just wrapped up in September of this year. And part of what they were looking at was other draft models. And one of them was a targeted draft for critical skills. Again, there's many issues, but we did a deep dive into that. And there's complications there as well. But I think your thinking is on the right line. If we could figure out a way that there was common credentialing, where we, unlike the medical field, where you're credentialed by the government, by the state, we can pull them in. There is not such a common credentialing for this type of cyber expertise we're looking at. But it's certainly worth noting, and I appreciate your bringing up our previous work. But check it out, Inspired to Serve. It's the final report of the National Commission on Military National Public Service.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that, Jill. I mean, I think anytime anybody says draft, everybody's ears perk up and say, what?
It is. Well, it was a commission chartered by Congress in 2017, actually. And we're looking at the review of the military selective service process. Again, at the time that this was started, it was because of debate on the House floor, whether to register women for the draft. And as it evolved within the conference, it became looking at all forms of service and how to look at the draft and then look at ways to increase voluntary service in military national public service. But the selective service review portion of that, when we went out and talked to people and we talked to experts and everyday Americans about would we ever use the draft, it was similar to Sam's previous response. We're never going to do that. Never going to do it, never going to do it, because we haven't used the draft since Vietnam. However, there's obviously a good deal of historical evidence that we have had reason to conscript people into the service. What it looks like in the future may be different from what it has looked like in the past, but that doesn't mean we're never going to be able to push the American populace to the point where we need to bring in people who are not willingly coming to the door of the recruiter's office. And right now, the big scary statistic for most people is that you have 1.5% of 17 to 24-year-olds who are eligible for military service, who actually physically meet the requirements for service. They get A's and B's in high school, which is of the academic quality that we're looking for, and are propense to serve. And that's a pretty scary statistic moving forward. So if you're looking at recruiting and retention and what the people side looks like, we've got an uphill battle.
Peter Singer, the futurist who wrote Ghost Fleet and those other things, wrote a piece in Defense One a little ways back suggesting that what we need is sort of a civilian conservation corps, but a civilian cyber corps, sort of a separate, a corps, a government-run organization that would bring in people. And while the New Deal era CCC was building trails and that sort of stuff. Nevertheless, the idea that you could get some sort of organization that would begin to have people have ties, and whether it leads to some sort of certification process that allows the Navy to look at its members and say, okay, well, this guy meets the standards, or she meets the standards. Nevertheless, that's one model that that might get us a little way there anyway.
Absolutely. Actually, that was another recommendation that came out of that same commission, was a civilian cyber reserve. And I think the key factor here is, in this particular instance, is less the cyber, more of the security clearance. If we're going to have a reserve component focused on cyber, we need to make sure that they are able to roll straight into their job and not wait 3 years for their security clearance to catch up with them before they touch a computer. And that's a big hurdle that's not necessarily within the Navy's purview. But if you did it whole of government wide, I think that would be a wonderful approach forward.
Mm-hmm. And the whole situation also points out a cultural change that we need to have, and that is we need to go back to heavy prototyping. We need to establish trial programs such as this. The first thing that occurred to me based on what Jill says is, let's try it. Let's set aside a certain amount of money to bring a certain amount of people, see if it works. But to do that, we have to accept the fact that it may fail. And throughout, we have gotten to the point within Department of Defense that efficiency trumps everything, which we are not going to set. We don't have a situation where we set aside a certain amount of money for a prototypical ship and say, okay, we don't know if that's going to work, but we're going to build it and test it and learn from it. No, we want programs that we're going to build 10, 20, 30, because we want the efficiencies of scale. And that prevents us, that sort of thinking prevents us from taking a chance on establishing programs that might fail. Do I think we should have a civilian cyber corps? I think we should try it. But instead of planning, we should try it in a small amount and see if it'll work. But again, Department of Defense is focused on efficiencies of scale. We have to accept that doing these sort of things, we have to bend steel metaphorically with the realization that it may fail. We're trying something to see if it will work. And we're experimentation, we call it experimentation. We don't do that enough. We're not willing to take the risks that entails, whether it's with CyberCore, whether it's with new platforms. And until we could get to that point, we're not going to be at the point that you could say, okay, we'll have a 500 ship Navy in 2045. We don't know. That presumes that a lot of these autonomous or platforms will work. We don't know that. It's hard. Engineering is hard. We need to prototype, and we need to prototype in a way where we're willing to spend serious money on testing something out, whether that's a personnel, testing out new personnel, recruiting methods, or testing out platforms. That's what we would be doing, and focusing on that instead of focusing on kind of bumper sticker, what if sort of plans.
Well, in the 2% for inflation and 2% in real growth, I'm sure there's got to be some money for that, don't you think? All right.
Sure.
In terms of experimenting with new stuff, one of the last questions I asked the CNO about was artificial intelligence, machine learning. These new technologies that will really allow us to do more with less, or at least that's the hope and the promise. And CNO had talked about various things like we need to help the fleet, we need to help sailors and leaders understand what it is and what it might do, and how to play around with it. And Jill, I wonder how that struck you.
I don't think he's wrong. I think he's ahead of himself. I do think that we need to inform the leadership of what AI and ML is capable of, so they can set a vision for us for the future. Right now, as Sam said, we actually are experimenting quite a bit. There's plenty of experimentation going on, but we don't have a vision for how to integrate AI and ML in the long term. And I don't think that is specific to the Navy in this case. So we're still working that out. We can be assured that it is going to be a part of the future. That's now a settled question. We're on board with that. But enough people are not familiar with what it is, how to leverage it, that they can't build that vision. So before we get the sailors working on things and trying to figure out, how to get used to AI and ML, let's get the leadership all synced on where we're headed with it. And then it will hopefully trickle down to the force. I think that sailors are actually probably much more adaptable than our senior leaders at this point, given that they grew up in a different generation. Again, the technology that they're just used to having at their fingertips, we can leverage their ability to be able to, tag things and help with machine learning, as long as we know what the purpose is. I think that's what we are still searching for. That's what we need to get.
Yeah, Brad, you just gave me a chance to do a commercial message. In March, the Naval Institute Press will publish the book AI at War, how big data, machine learning, and AI is going to change naval warfare. I'm an editor along with George Calderisi. We have a whole bunch of people ranging from Bob Work all the way to scientists at Navy Information Warfare Center Pacific. And here's the bottom line. AI will be a good tool in the toolkit, but there's so much hype about it. Right now, I think the Navy can effectively use AI for administrative processes, speeding up. Basically, what you're doing is you're using higher level computing, programs that can self-learn, and the fact that they can take they calculate, they predict what the outcomes are, and then they could see whether or not the outcomes match the reality and then add to their own programming. These will be useful tools, but Silicon Valley will not build us on spec the sort of AI systems that the Navy and Department of Defense needs. We're going to have to put money into it, and we're going to have to realize that what AI is used for in the civilian sector doesn't quite correspond with what the Navy needs to use it for. So will AI be a significant tool in the future? Yes, it will. Will it match the expectations that a lot of people have for it, or at least those expectations that appear in the media? Probably not. And there's a whole reason why not. So I encourage people when the book gets published to take a look at that, because I think it's a balanced view across a lot of perspectives. And the thing about any solution like that, and let me come back to what Jill was saying. Yeah, the CNO's ahead of himself. We don't need to start teaching people about how AI provides options until we figure out what options it provides. It is very useful for things like Project Maven, where the AI looks at hours and hours of drone footage to be able to do visual recognition on potential terrorists or potential targets. Yes, that's how we're going to use it. But until we build up some substantial use of AI, trying to teach people about it, I don't think that's an effective use of our time. I don't see it, because what we end up is we end up teaching them the hype. Don't necessarily teach them the tools. And so I think that I agree with Jill. The CNO is ahead of himself on that one.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. Let's try taking some questions from the audience. Here's one. Are the politics there to support any Navy increase in funding? Does it matter if Republicans or Democrats are in charge? And how much does any Navy increase depend on buying into the China threat?
I'll begin us with that and say, I don't think we will get a substantial increase in, for example, shipbuilding until Congress wakes up one day and says, oh, really? Is the PLAN twice the size of the U.S. Navy? Oh, that might be a bad thing. Until we get to that point, I don't see us getting an increase, because right now there are so many other issues that Congress is focused on. Yes, we will always have the support of the Sea Power Subcommittee. Yes, we will have the support from those in Congress from areas that are maritime or shipbuilding areas and the like. I don't think there's appreciation for how the Navy allows how serves our geoeconomic interests. And when people think about maritime security, they think about pirates and this and that. The whole purpose in having navies is to ensure that no other nation can interfere with our trade, or as Alfred Thayer Mahan would say, ensure that our trade and our interaction with other nations aren't operated as if we're fugitive, that is, at someone else's sufferance. Do you really want the United States, international connections, use of the global commons, operate at sufferance of the PRC? I hope not. But I don't think Congress is recognizing it. I don't think, I think many people in DOD don't recognize that purpose. So in the long range, I don't think that that's interest. But I do believe that one day Congress and others will wake up and say, oh, how come our Navy is the second in the world? And that's coming. It will be that way by 2049. Based on current trends in our defense programs.
From my perspective, I think the question was about politics in particular. I think really they're talking about the November election. Pandemic is here. We still have to figure out what to do with it. We've got an uncertain economic recovery. We've got national debt. There's a whole lot of things that have nothing to do with who's in charge of the White House. But it will matter, but might matter less to the actual appropriators, right? And so when it comes down to it, funding is going to come from Congress. We will make sure if you're trying to do this kind of expansive growth, that's the audience you're looking at as we move forward. As far as China, I don't think you have to buy into the China threat idea. I think it would be unwise to look at the Asia Pacific region and not recognize that China is the largest geopolitical actor there. That doesn't mean it's a threat to America, but what we have seen is that they have certainly a regional actor that is now going to other parts of the globe, which is why we were paying attention in a different kind of way. And that's not imposing any ill intent on them. That's reality. They are in Africa, they are in South America, they are in Asia Pacific, everywhere. That is the state of play right now. So to Sam's point, if you look into the future, whether you think they're a threat to America or not, America has a vested interest in the current status quo, and how we might look to their role in the future is going to change based on our perspective.
All right.
Can I just follow up on that? I am very I'm very concerned because I think that by 2049, the PLAN or the PLA will have an Atlantic command, and it will be sending periodic patrols to the Gulf of Mexico. It knows the U.S. playbook. It is creating a People's Liberation Army Navy that is exactly configured like the United States, down to building ships. That really doesn't make a lot of sense from their perspective. We're not talking about Asia by that time frame. And my concern is this: if we do not maintain, the option is for China, they're going to try to go into what the vacuum that we leave. And that's my concern of our realization on the purpose of Navy. Okay, I'm a navalist. Obviously, I think in those terms. But again, that drives me back to what I've said earlier. Navies and armies are for different functions. I think they should be funded in different ways. We don't look at it that way because of the ideology of jointness. But when you talk about the future of the Navy, you also have to talk about the geoeconomic purposes of the Navy. And that's neglected now. And it probably, with everything else going on with Congress, that will continue to be neglected until there is a major shock.
All right. And Jill, I'll let you have the last word if you like. We're just about out of time.
Well, how do you follow up to Sam on that one? I think just to cue off of his last phrase, we can change the playbook. And I think that's our charge right now. If they're doing what we have been doing in the past, we need to look forward, plot a different course, and one that they won't be able to reach. And I think that's CNO's goal, and I wish him well.
Great. Well, Sam, Jill, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this has been a really great discussion. I hope our watchers found it that way as well. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in, who's watched the CNO, who's watched our panel discussion as well. Really appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed our series on the state of defense. We'd like to thank all of our underwriters for making this event possible. And we hope you'll send the recorded webcast to your colleagues to keep the conversation going. Thanks again, and we will see you online next time.